Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, Jarby Laws, and this is my co-host.
For Wells.
We appreciate all the support on our recent content. And before we do get started, please don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the OBT Podcast for more content and updates.
Yeah, so we had a stretch of games over the weekend, right? Where, I think it was kind of eye-opening just in terms of just what we were kind of able to see and gather from a couple of these teams. And we've talked about some of these teams in the past, and we'll get into some more of them as we get in there. But we did have the Los Angeles Lakers and the Denver Nuggets matchup, right? So this was obviously a big matchup because we know the last few seasons, right, the Nuggets have gotten the better of the Lakers, right? Obviously, they've beaten them, 13 of the last 14 times prior to this game, and they've eliminated them in a sweep and in 5 games, right, in the past couple of playoff series, right? The last time the Lakers beat them was in 2020, but this was a big one, right? Because obviously this was the first Nuggets-Lakers matchup since earlier in the season. Obviously now you have Luka involved, right? So you got him as opposed to Anthony Davis, and the Lakers were able to pull off a blowout win, 123-100. Luka led the way with 32 points, 10 rebounds, 7 assists, 4 steals, and a block. 10 of 22 from the field, 4 of 9 from 3. Looked more like a vintage Luka game, right? Where the previous few games, he didn't quite look like himself. Obviously, in that Charlotte game, he was very bad, right? Probably one of the worst games he's ever played since he was a rookie or something like that, right? He just didn't really look comfortable. The offense for the Lakers looked very clunky in those games. In this one, looked much better. There were stretches where they couldn't hit threes, and they were generating pretty good looks for most of the game. But then the other part that I think was super impressive was the defense, where you could see, even though outside of Jackson Hayes, they don't really have any other size at the center spot. Alex Len didn't really play. They didn't play their two-way guys at the center spot either, but they were flying around, they were active. And even without a center, they still have some guys with size they could put out there. Like they would have Luka with like 3 or 4 forwards out there where it's like him and Rui and Dorian Finney-Smith and Vando, right? So they were able to be very active on the defensive end. They limited Jokic, right, to just 12 points on 2 of 7 shooting, 10 assists, 13 rebounds, 6 turnovers, right? So probably one of his worst games that I've seen him play in a while, right? And they just made him uncomfortable, right? Which the Lakers have not necessarily been able to do, right? Because usually his stat line usually tends to be pretty consistent, right? Where they just don't really have much of an answer. They kind of just let it so that everyone else could kind of go off, but we're not going to let him go off and do anything. And we're just going to be comfortable with Aaron Gordon hitting threes, Russell Westbrook hitting threes, right? And it worked, right? Obviously, we'll see what it looks like the next time. We'll see what it looks like if it's a potential playoff series. But for the Lakers, they're continuing, their strong level of play over the last couple of months where, the big thing is their defense. They've had the number 1 defense in the last 17 games. Now, there is some context about half of those games. They're not playing great teams, but there also are some good matchups in there where it's like the Knicks, right? The Nuggets, the Clippers, and other teams like that. So it is impressive, and it just kind of goes to show, like we talked about before, where once Luka plays like Luka, everything else kind of falls into place, right? Then you see Austin being able to take advantage of, the defensive coverages he's getting, right? LeBron now, he can rest and not have to play on the ball quite as much. Obviously, like Austin did have some playmaking responsibilities, but now you got a guy in Luka who can be a real number 1, and it makes the game easier for everyone else involved. So this was one of their best wins of the season against a team that they've had some real issues matchup-wise going against. Again, we'll see what it looks like come playoff time, but at least we saw some type of a concept of a potential way for them to get a win against the Nuggets.
Yeah, from the Nuggets perspective, I think it was probably a little jarring, going up against a new look of a team like this. But at the end of the day, you do have to tip your hat to the Lakers. Like you said, Luka having a great performance. And I think, like you said, when he plays well, it opens up opportunities for other guys to step in and do their jobs just as well. Like, I know a lot of people were talking about the redundancy of, having a LeBron and Luka on the same team. But at the end of the day, these guys are pros, they're professionals, they can adapt for sure. And I think you're going to probably see, if Luka's not having a good night, LeBron is going to, carry like he has in the previous games that, they played where Luka, didn't play that well and vice versa. So, and when they're both on, I think that's going to be where it's something really special. And we already know what that's probably going to look like come playoff time. I think the only concern that you do have is probably the center rotation come playoff time still. But at the end of the day, like you said, there is somewhat of a path for success because you do have a lot of wings who can do multiple things on both ends of the floor, and I think that could pose a problem for Denver. We'll see, like you said, but the key was really, like you said, slowing down Jokic and the turnover battle as well. Because when you take care of the ball and you force teams to be uncomfortable, you're probably going to win.
Exactly. And for the Nuggets, right, they had won 9 straight games. The issue that we talked about was a lot of those games were against not the best of teams,
Mm-hmm.
right? This was by far the best team that they had played during this stretch, right? And it kind of showed because we've seen the Nuggets have some of these type of games against some of the better teams, right? Like they played the Knicks a couple times, didn't look very good, right? Obviously they played the Wolves who have a worse record, right? But still it's a tough matchup, didn't really look all that great, right? We saw them, early in the season lose to Oklahoma City, right? So obviously, again, for Denver, the main thing is going to continue like defensively. Are they going to be able to find ways to get stops with some of these guys? And can they get some help from some of their second unit players, right? Like Julian Strother. It was very much a struggle for him. I think he even now, right? He just picked up a foul. It just, it hasn't really looked he didn't really look great in this game and didn't really look like a guy you could probably trust come playoff time. I know Peyton Watson was out, right? But
Mm-hmm.
just that's kind of still the issue that we have looking forward is can you trust some of these second unit guys and can you trust the defense? Because I do think offensively the Nuggets have shown that they're a really good offensive team, even though they didn't look like it against the Lakers, right? So they can adjust. It's just a matter of this is one of the problems in terms of them being able to make a deep run is it still feels like they're not as good as they were the previous couple of seasons, even with Jokic having a great year. So that's kind of where come playoff time, maybe it'll just look different where everything just kind of clicks into place. But it's just tough, right? Because obviously for them, they're very comfortable against this Lakers team, but it is a different type of team now completely where, it's not Anthony Davis in the middle, right? And it's not, like a bunch of smaller guys, right? Because they had a lot of lineups in, the previous couple of seasons, right? Where a lot of their really good offensive lineups had guys that were just much smaller and could be hunted defensively. Not that these guys may not get hunted defensively. It's just a different type of player. And like say like a D'Angelo Russell, you can trust like a Luka offensively
Heck
more
yeah.
than a D'Lo. Right? And that's
And
not a
AR
knock.
too. AR has
Yeah,
been balling
exactly.
out like crazy. It's amazing.
Right, exactly. Like for him, he's having a career year,
Yeah.
and this last stretch, of the last couple of months has been like the best basketball he's ever played, right? Which
Yeah.
is significant considering a lot of these games were without Anthony Davis even before the Luca trade, and he's helped them out in some of those wins, right? Like we saw against the Pacers, right? He had a 45-point game where LeBron and Luca didn't play. So his growth, both, his growth offensively has been really special in terms of his on the ball responsibilities have gone up, and now you can kind of see, him reaping the benefits because it wasn't working right last year at different points, right? Where you could see early on they tried to give him those responsibilities, he just wasn't quite ready for it. But now with all those reps he's gotten, he seems much more comfortable, and that's going to help them come playoff time. And that's why they were so hesitant to not just want to give him up, in any of these trades, right? Because with the way he's playing now, it would be very hard to make the case of like, yeah, they should have traded him for DeJounte Murray because I mean he's
Yeah.
been playing, at an elite level as of late.
Yeah. Super elite.
Yeah. Then we move on and we had a couple other matchups, right? Where, now we've kind of seen, Golden State pick it up, right? Where obviously they've now basically won 4 games in a row, right? They're 4-1 in the Jimmy Butler or since the Jimmy Butler trade. Excuse me, they've won 3 in a row, 4-1 since the Jimmy Butler trade. But, everything kind of has clicked into place now, right? Where you can kind of see now you have a second guy next to Steph, right? Now that kind of makes things easier for all of the other role players, right? Where they were kind of overtasked in terms of what they could do and what they were asked to do. Right now, everything is easier because now you have Butler who's comfortable in this type of offense. He can get to the free throw line too. He's still a good defender. He's got size, right? He's got experience. So now you can kind of see everything working out where this is kind of the best case scenario for them, where you got a guy who's engaged. You're getting essentially, as of right now, the best version of him. It's not really messing anything up. Steph now has had what, like the most amount of consecutive games where he's had 20 or more. He's been much better recently, right, since the Jimmy Butler deal. So that's good to see. So now, for them, they just have to continue to win games. They're 6-4 in the last 10, and maybe hopefully they can get into that playoff spot because things are opening up for them now, and they do have an easier schedule. So it's possible, given what we've seen as of late from a lot of these other teams, it's possible they could sneak in, to that sixth spot because a lot of the other teams have kind of just sort of been flattened out recently, right? Where like teams above them, like the Mavs and the Wolves and the Clippers, they've been playing 500 basketball as of late. The Rockets have kind of fallen off. We'll see what it looks like once they get healthy. But still, for them, right? It's looking great. Kaminga's on his way back. I'm curious to see how those pieces fit because it's going to be a lot of guys that teams don't necessarily have to guard from the 3-point line. But it is a smart, experienced team with a really good coach. And, they've got guys that are contributing pretty much everywhere, even a guy like Quentin Post as a rookie. Again, can you trust some of those guys come playoff time? Maybe not, but at the very least now you have an extra guy that you can trust in Jimmy Butler. And now you could be in a scenario where, like, if they get the right matchup, maybe they could pull off an upset. I don't think they can win the title or necessarily get to the finals, but this is, they're in a way better spot now, at least for the next couple of seasons, than they were before.
Yeah, for sure. I think the biggest takeaway for me is definitely the defense that Jimmy Butler does bring, and I know it's not like you lost like. I mean, like defensively, I would say Wiggins and Jimmy Butler are close and similar in terms of their skill set and what they can do. But at the end of the day, I think Jimmy Butler probably has a better defensive IQ, especially in certain moments, than Andrew Wiggins. And offensively, we already know that Jimmy Butler can truly take over a game when need be. But I think the relieving of pressure from Steph Curry is also a huge factor as well, because I think that's going to extend, probably the amount of years that Steph can play potentially if this crew sticks together. And yeah, like you said, he's doing all the right things. He's playing the right way in a system that he's comfortable with. And I think, that's the cool thing is it's really been seamless. You haven't really seen any any crazy bumps in the road. And I think that's really special when a guy is really playing his role, but also knows that he can take over at any moment. And that's really cool as well. So I think it's a great move. Initially I wasn't too high on it. I thought, that the Warriors might slump a little bit, but yeah, Jimmy Butler being in there and, making an immediate impact is definitely amazing. And once Kuminga comes back, I think that's going to be an interesting factor, like you said, because, I will say I feel like the bench might be missing a little bit of athleticism, and I think bringing him in might give you that little boost that you need because Wiggins was pretty athletic too. So I guess that'll be a good sign once he comes back because I guess the only other like two athletes would be what Gary Payton and Jackson Davis. So
he doesn't even play anymore.
Exactly.
He's not even on the rotation because
exactly.
They knocked him off for Quentin Post, right? Because
which is good.
Stretch five.
Yeah, and yeah, they're getting contributions from everything. So it seems like their strength in numbers kind of thing is somewhat working out. But Jimmy Butler just raises the ceiling because then those guys don't have as much pressure on them.
Yeah, Celtics Knicks don't have to talk too much about that. Another beatdown, right? Same song and dance as the previous two games, right? Where this one I guess was the closest of the three, right? Where, I mean, but like at one point they were up by like 25 or whatever.
The game
but
was
the Knicks did get it down to single digits. But it's the same issue where just for the Knicks, they just don't really have much of an answer offensively for Tatum or Brown. Porzingis, 6 of 15, right? But he was, I thought, pretty impactful, especially on the defensive end, right? He got a ton of blocks and, was able to kind of guard the rim for the Knicks. Right. And, again, now for the Celtics, they've won 5 straight. Right. So they've kind of quieted down, I think, people who may have felt like something's going on. They're not playing as well. I mean, I think both you and I felt like it was just a slump anyways.
Yeah.
Right. But now you can see like they're looking a lot better than they were before. They've won 5 in a row. Like I said, a number of these games haven't necessarily been very close. And then from the Knicks perspective, it's another game where they haven't been able to get a win against, one of the top teams. And, obviously that doesn't necessarily mean everything, but the only problem is a lot of these games haven't been particularly competitive. That's the part that kind of worries me just from It's not so much that, because if they lost a bunch of close games by a few points, that'd be one thing. It'd still be kind of a problem. But these aren't even, competitive, and it's the same script each game, right? Like they just played the Cavs, and they got smashed by, 30 or whatever it was. We saw them earlier in the season lose both games to Oklahoma City. So that's kind of been the problem for the Knicks so far, where it seems like against a lot of the top teams, they've really struggled. They've been able to beat some teams, right? Like they beat the Nuggets a couple of times. They destroyed Memphis, I think, when they played them. But just in general, it feels like it's going to be a tall task for them to be able to get out of the East, because it just feels like the Cavs and the Celtics, just feel kind of a little ways ahead in terms of how good they are. I mean, I guess for the Knicks, you can hope that Mitchell Robinson comes back, right? Because he's expected to come back soon. How much can that impact them? I mean, it can help in terms of you can play some good two big lineups, and that could make a difference. So I think that can help them. It's just a matter of how much can you depend on him, because he hasn't played at all since the playoffs last year. So he'll probably be on a minutes restriction. He probably won't be able to play back-to-backs. And, you kind of need to get some of the, you need to start stacking up wins down the stretch just so you can stay in that 3 spot. And, just he doesn't seem to have a track record of being dependable at this point.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. And this is my pick to, win the finals, and, seeing them pretty much have a losing record against, all these top teams is really rough. And I think, we all know what they can do offensively. That's not really the issue. I think defensively is where you get really scared of, what they can't really do, and that's slow down teams as a unit. Individually, I think they do a good job of slowing certain people down, but collectively, it seems like somebody's going to have a great night. You know what I mean? And, the Celtics did just that. Pretty much an onslaught from both their wing guys, Tatum and Jaylen Brown. So, I don't know what the Knicks do from here. Like you said, maybe bank on Mitchell Robinson coming back, but even then, I don't think that can save them. And another thing, I feel like their bench, granted their bench did kind of play them back into this game a little bit. But the bench, I feel like come playoff time, I'm just not too hyped on anymore, but it is what it is. And for you would think, with the starting lineup they do have, with the wings, Mikal Bridges and OG Anunoby, you would think that they would be a lot better defensively than they are at the moment. But I know OG is coming back from an injury slowly but surely.
Right.
But at the end of the day, I think it's really inexcusable for a season as a whole to just be so mediocre defensively, and I just don't really think there's a pathway for them to win anymore.
Yeah, 0-7 against the top 0-7 against the top 3 teams, right? So Cleveland,
Yeah.
Boston, Oklahoma City, right?
Yeah.
Because they lost earlier today. So it's tough.
And I think they have a losing record against all the top 8 seeds in the East. So that should tell you enough. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's rough. But,
Yeah.
Again, we'll see maybe come playoff time, maybe it'll look a little bit different. Because, sometimes like teams might struggle against some teams in the regular season, and then in the playoffs, it's a different story. So
I hope
I think
so.
I've said I think they may be better built for a postseason run. But, it's just this is that's part of the reason why it's tough to pick them, is just because there's no proof of concept right now that they're able to do it. So you're hoping, that some stuff will go their way that we just haven't necessarily seen this year. And even like a Towns, right? He's kind of struggled against, some of these teams as well.
Yeah,
Like,
big
I mean,
time.
he made a run to get it back to a competitive game against the Celtics, right? But in most of these matchups, they've targeted him on, both ends of the floor.
Yeah,
Where,
for sure.
he's had a great season as a whole, right? They wouldn't be where they are without him. But, in some of these specific games, right, where they need him the most, he's been, kind of up and down, right?
Yeah. They've been putting him in the pick and roll. Like Jason Tatum was going straight to his body the whole game. It was rough. And you would think that the Knicks would, have a solid chance of beating the team that they were quite literally assembled to stop. But, we've seen that story before. So,
right. So now I think we're gonna get into now our midseason grades for the Western Conference teams, right? Obviously, in the previous episode, we did it against the East. So now we'll do it against the West. So I think we're gonna do a little bit of a different format this time around. Right. So I think the way that we're going to do it is we're probably just going to, start with one of the grades and just kind of talk about all those teams together, right? And just kind of compare and see where we're at in terms of how we feel about some of these teams. So do you want to start with Fs or do you want to start with As?
let's start with Fs, get the bad stuff out of the way.
Well, right now, so far, I only actually right now really only have one F.
Me
So,
too.
I don't know if you have one F.
I have one.
I have the Phoenix Suns as the F.
Likewise, likewise.
Yeah.
I'm glad we
Yeah.
share a grade
So
here.
right. So the issue for them, as we know, for most of the season is they've just been a very disappointing team since the first 10, 15 games of the season, right? They started off 8-1 or whatever, right? And they're basically, what, like 19-29 since then. And they're 2-8 in their last 10. And this is a stretch where they really need to win some of these games because now they're starting to kind of fall behind where they may not even make the playoffs at all, but it just seems like their situation is getting, worse and worse. And we've talked about it where going into the season, I think we were high on them as a regular season team. I
Yes.
think we were kind of moving away from them as a possible championship team,
Yes.
but we at least thought they could win, like 50-ish games because we looked at what
Yes.
happened last season where they won 49 with most of their guys not playing together too much. And then we felt like, all right, well, they did some stuff in the offseason. They had some good draft picks. They signed Tyus Jones, even though we felt like he was probably better as a backup point guard. But the same issues from last year have kind of just continued to creep up where they can't really defend, they can't really rebound. So even if they get a stop, they can't clear the possession. Obviously they're an offense first team. They can't get offensive rebounds. So they're going to have to, so they have to score pretty much the first time down, which they have guys that are tough shot makers, but they're still tough shots. So the offense isn't quite that great. So that's, so you have an issue with the weak defense and the offense isn't good enough to make up for it. And when you're not a great defensive team anyways, right, it makes it super difficult because you have to make up for it on offense, and there's just going to be games where you just can't hit anything. Like that happens for every team, even the best offensive teams in the league. We've seen the Celtics have terrible shooting games. We've seen the Knicks have some terrible shooting games, right? Teams, all these teams. So that's kind of the issue there. The big three continues to just seem like it just doesn't fit. There was a long stretch, right, where eventually Beal became the backup, right? Now it seems like the last couple of games he's moved back into the starting five. They got to win the first game. Then they lost the second game, right? Both against bad teams, right? So it seems like nothing's worked, right? Tyus Jones started pretty much almost the whole season, right? And then he started the year off good. He's not been good as of late, getting hunted on defense like most of their guys, and the offense has kind of gone away. Now he's the backup point guard, but it's just they don't have a great combination of guys. They brought in Nick Richards. He starts at the 5. Doesn't always play as much as I think you would think, just given the fact that they don't really have any other centers that you would want to play a ton, like Mason Plumlee, right? That's really the only other guy that gets consistent minutes at the 5 spot. Royce O'Neal now has stepped into the starting 5. He's all right, but just in general, it's the same problems as last year. You have a different coach. He seems like he hasn't really been able to crack the code either, right? Like people have questioned, like, hey, where's Ryan Dunn? I think maybe he's had some injuries, right? He's been all right defensive. He's been really good defensively, but sometimes up and down. Booker's had like an up and down season, right? And it's just weird because it just feels like they should be better than what they are. But it feels like now we have enough information that this is just not a great basketball team. And, now the question is, where do we go from here? Because there's a world where they miss the playoffs and don't even get into the top 10 at all. And then you kind of wonder what happens in the summer, considering it seems like they were prepared to trade Kevin Durant without him knowing potentially, I guess, where they were going to trade him to Golden State to go get Jimmy Butler, which is interesting, but it seems like it just hasn't worked. Guys don't really seem like they're happy, which happens when you're losing, but it's just been the worst case scenario.
Yeah, man. I agree with almost everything that you said. F I think is for fool's gold. I think this team I'm completely done with in terms of, any hope of them going on a run at all. I don't think they make the playoffs, to be honest. They haven't shown anything, any real flashes, any consistency. And I think that's the problem. They're too inconsistent for me to even label them as a contender. And I think, that was the problem that we kind of had going into the season where, like you said, a lot of people actually picked this team to go to the finals because they thought, all right, a season under the belt. They had a, bad meltdown, whatever, last year. And then coming into the season, people really like their offseason. But yeah, it just blew up in their face. I don't even know what exactly went on behind the scenes, because I mean it's relatively the same roster, and I think this roster is technically better than the one that they had last year. But I don't know what happened. The team's too expensive. Um, they shouldn't be even close to below 500 in my opinion. Like with a roster loaded like that in terms of the talent, um, and
Right.
injuries too. I mean that kind of played a part early in the season, but I mean now the guys have been pretty much available at all times, all three of them, and we still haven't had anything, special happen really this season, and it's just really been unfortunate. And you lost the locker room too. I feel like the whole thing is just in shambles. Like you had Beal having some crazy quotes, going into the deadline, because obviously we thought that the only move that would realistically work for them to be able to keep, Book and KD on the team would be moving Bradley Beal to bring in, somewhat of a better replacement. And that blew up in their face. And then they tried to move KD. So I think, the team will probably lose out on KD this offseason. I think this is the team to watch in the offseason. If there is like some sort of blow up move, I think Kevin Durant will probably be the guy who leaves or whatever the case may be. But I feel like that's just an automatic F, because you're the 11th seed and you have, two superstars and another star in the mix. And I just feel like all the hype around this team has just completely been decimated. And I don't know. I don't know. I mean, like realistically, yeah, they could win enough games and get to that, 6 seed or the play in or whatever. But I just, like I said, I feel like it's like fool's gold at this point.
Yeah, that's the tough part where you just kind of wonder, what happens after that, right? Like, where does Durant go? Hopefully wherever he goes, right? Maybe he can, I guess, enjoy himself more.
Yeah.
Hopefully, but that's the rough part for the Suns is like, it seemed like there was so much excitement, going in for this team, and it's just year by year just been ripped and ripped and ripped off. Where it's
Yeah.
just, now I'm sure if you're a Suns fan, it's probably pretty tough where it's like you probably don't even really want to watch the team anymore at this point because like you said, we already know not good enough to win the title, probably not even at this point good enough to make the playoffs unless they can kind of get their stuff together with maybe they can, but there's no way where you can salvage it with a title, right? Maybe they can get into the plan, but that's kind of like you still underachieve, right? Because like you said,
Yeah.
you feel like you would think this roster would be better than last year's, but I mean, right now, record wise, it's worse,
It's
right?
way
And like you
worse,
said,
exponentially.
with better injury luck this time around compared to last season. That's the part that's really bizarre, where it just seems like nothing has worked, and that's the kind of the case to be made for why you don't see teams constructed like this, where you kind of just put three stars together like it's 2K without really kind of thinking about the fit, and again, like it just seems like it just doesn't work. Even though and it's not like any of them have been terrible, because even like Beal, I don't think has been bad. It's just like I think the issue is like for $50 million.
Yeah.
No,
That's the problem.
like
That's the problem.
that's the problem. Especially because he's not gonna be able to do the things that you would want him to do as the third guy. Like
Right.
you can't really ask him to be, sacrifice and be like a defensive stopper,
Right.
for most of the game. Not that he can't play defense at all. It's just that's not what he does, right?
Right.
And it's just and offensively it's still too redundant. Like that's kind of the problem there. So like I said, offensively not good enough, defensively definitely not good enough. And it just seems like now, like you said, they're headed for a very disappointing season and probably a very active offseason, which
Yeah,
is rough because
100%.
they got new ownership and it seems like, you know, person wise, it seems like a significant upgrade
Oh
as
yeah.
an individual. It just seems like the decision making just seems kind of like a little bit like too, I don't know, like just kind of
Reckless.
like too all over, yeah, reckless all over the place. It doesn't seem like it's like it like it just seems like it's too much.
Yeah,
So
agreed.
yeah, so now let's get into some D's.
Oh
So
boy.
in terms of D's, I have three at least as of right now, right? So I have the Jazz, I have the Pelicans, and I have the Kings. So maybe you have a different matchup, but I guess for me with the Pelicans, I mean their season it's tough, right? They're 13-43. They've had a bunch of injuries over the course of the season, and it stinks because I know going into the season we were not super high on New Orleans, right? Like because we knew, okay, obviously Zion had a really good year, then he got hurt, right? And then obviously that kind of made everything fall apart. Ingram had an underwhelming series because, and part of that was Zion was out. And it just kind of felt like, all right, now they don't really have much at the center spot, right? What are they going to do? And it's weird because there are some bright spots where it's like Trey Murphy has had a great season, right? He's kind of been able to take advantage of guys being out, 22 a game, 5 rebounds. Now he's got more, on the ball capabilities, right? Which makes him, a much more dangerous player, right? And that's cool because he was given that max extension. Yves Missi, right, has been, I think, way better than we would have anticipated as a rookie, right, where he could possibly win Rookie of the Year. I don't know if he will, but he certainly will be in the mix. He'll be all rookie team, that's for sure. They were able to move Ingram, right? I mean, you got back, what was it, Bruce Brown and Kelly Olynyk and a pick, right? Those are guys that are decent rotational pieces, right? But it's for for an expiring contract. I mean, yeah, you probably couldn't have done much better than that. And then even this season, like in the games that Zion played, I mean, he's given them, what, like 25, 25 a game, 7.5 rebounds, 5 assists, a block and, over a steal a game. Obviously the thing is it's only in 20 games. So that's the problem, right? And obviously he's, been on like a minutes restriction at times. So I don't know. So the bright spots, I guess, Yves Missi, Trey Murphy, but everything else has been horrible. Because, like I said, Zion was hurt, Ingram was hurt, DeJounte Murray tore his freaking Achilles, so he's not even going to be back until probably late next season, if at all. And Herb Jones, right? Obviously, that was another key piece. And then he had the shoulder injury, so he's been out. He hasn't been able to play. Just not a lot of bright spots for them. So that's the part where I think it absolutely stings, right? And then, for the Jazz, it just seems like there's just not a whole lot that's been really good for them. Like Markkanen's been kind of a disappointment. Kessler's back to being really good, so that's a good thing. But then you kind of look at some of their rookies and, Cody Williams, right, who was their highest draft pick. He's just not really done much. I know he's been hurt, but even before he got hurt, didn't really do a whole lot. I guess one positive is Collier, right? He's been kind of stepping into the point guard role, showing some pretty good chops as a playmaker, even though, the shooting is, kind of like hit or miss, right? Collins has had a decent year, but it's like, why is he even there, right? They didn't really do anything at the deadline, so they couldn't really get rid of any of their vets. So it just feels kind of just, I don't know, just kind of meh, but they are bad. So that's the thing they have going for them, where they're going to be in the mix for a lottery pick. So at least that's good, right? And then for the Kings, they're just mediocre, right? They're 28 and 8. Pretty much the complete definition of mid. They traded De'Aaron Fox, didn't really get much back. They did get Zach LaVine, but it just doesn't really look like it fits. There's too many guys that are offense first players that kind of need the ball in their hands, and it just doesn't work. They can't stop anybody, and it looks like they're probably not making the playoffs either, right? Now they're, kind of in that 10th spot in the Western Conference, and it just, for them, just sucks, right? Because they seemed like they were on the rise. I know we were never that high on them, but it seemed like a few seasons ago they were on the rise, and they haven't made the playoffs since. Probably won't make it again this year, and it just kind of stinks now. Their franchise guy is gone, and now some of the other surrounding pieces look a little bit more disappointing because like Sabonis, I don't think has been quite as good. DeRozan's been fine, but it's like again, doesn't really need to be there now because I mean, you don't need him on a team like this. So it just there's not a whole lot to say from a Kings perspective. I guess Devin Carter in some games has been all right. Keon Ellis has been solid, but not really a whole lot for me.
Yeah, so I had two D's. One of them was the Pelicans, and I'll start with them. Kind of, similar to what you said, injury riddled team, really not much to say outside of that, but there was a reason that we picked the under for this team because we kind of saw this coming. Obviously, it didn't play out exactly how we predicted it to. But Brandon Ingram is no longer on the team, but the other freak injuries were kind of weird. And then obviously we already knew that Zion was most likely going to have some injury issues, but them being bad, I guess, wasn't really a surprise, but I didn't expect them to be this bad. You know what I mean? Like I thought them to
really good hurts.
Exactly. So, that's kind of my logic on giving them a D on that one. But The other D that I'm giving out is the Dallas Mavericks.
Okay.
Yeah, not really. Like, I don't know. Maybe it's because it might be a little bit of recency bias and stuff like that. I do like the roster composition, but, AD's hurt and, we don't know really when he's coming back. They're looking at a timetable for what, potentially like 2 weeks from now or a couple weeks from now, for him to be reevaluated. But, I feel like they're just going to continue to slide because, I mean, going into the break, they were like fifth or something like that. And now they've slid all the way down to 8. So I really don't know exactly what they could possibly do, except for get healthy and potentially, figure out that. But that's a lot of prayer and a lot of luck, I think, considering, some of the guys' injury history. Because at the end of the day, I think we all like the defensive upside of what the Mavericks can be. But also simply just trading away Luka Doncic for Anthony Davis is still mind-boggling, I think, to, all of us NBA fans. And, I think Mavericks fans would definitely want to bump that grade down to an F. But, simply for the fact that, you did get back a solid player in Anthony Davis, I think that does, bump it up a letter grade. But the problem is almost immediately his availability has become questionable. And I think, that's just an automatic non-starter because that could be a potential pattern for your franchise for as long as you do have Anthony Davis. And I think they've raised tons more questions, by trading away Luka Doncic. I know a lot of people have been talking about, well, Kyrie's the wild card piece. What's going to happen with him? Does he leave? Is he not comfortable? Is he also blindsided by the whole Luka thing? So we're kind of just waiting for the offseason and to see what that looks like. But at the end of the day, I feel like, you've kind of just given away your potential future for what? A guy who's, like I said, like you said as well, when the trade first happened, 80 is not a bad player at all. He's still top 15 guy, top 10 guy when healthy. But at the end of the day, I think you just made a huge mistake by trading away, your franchise player. So that's kind of why my grade is that low.
Yeah. I have 2 C's. Yeah, moving on to the C's.
Yeah.
So one of them is the Mavs, right?
Okay.
And then the other one is the Wolves. So for the Mavs, pretty much like you said, for the same reasons. It's just I think for them why I didn't quite bump them down to a D was only because they had kind of been able to stay afloat even with all the injuries. And I do think once whenever AD comes back, Gafford comes back, you at least have some type of a concept that this could be, a really, a good team, right? Your ceiling's probably lower without Luka, just because I think Luka's just a superior player, right? And also the team was built around him, where like you have defense, right? You have athleticism and things like that. But I think at the very least, like it's possible if they get healthy, they could be, again, like kind of a sleeper team there. But the problem is, like you said, your future is pretty much kind of, done at this point because your two main guys right now, right, AD and Kyrie, they're in their 30s, right? So for this year, maybe next year, right, maybe there's something there, but you would still have to find a way to improve the roster with what you have because, the rest of it, you would need to be able to improve if you want to be able to get into, the other mix, right? So it does stink that we haven't really been able to see a lot of games with their guys because some of the guys like Max Christie, right, who was really good as a Laker, he's continued his strong play with the Mavs, right, where he's shown that, he's a legit player on both ends of the floor, which again, like we already knew because we had seen him play like that for LA, but now he's doing it on another team too. And just the fact that you could kind of see, like I said, the framework of the defense. It's just the question is offensively, what does that look like, come playoff time? But at the very least, I think for this season, maybe if they can get healthy, there's something there. But it's hard to give them any higher than that just because it still is, to me, like a trade that you just should not do, right?
Yeah.
If it's
Agreed.
if it's like a 30-year-old Luka where like things just aren't working out, okay, maybe, but not at 25 when I
He's
just
so
feel
much
like there's still a
potential.
lot. Yeah, I just feel like there's still a lot left in the tank, and you just made the NBA Finals, and I don't think they make the finals this year, right? When I think, just not with what's been going on this season. It
No.
just seems like it's not in the cards because some of those guys won't be back for a while anyway. So,
Yeah.
then for the Wolves' perspective, right? They're 31-26, so they're the 7 seed. Obviously, for them, it's tough because last year they were one of the best teams in the league. They made the Western Conference Finals. Obviously, they lost in 5 in a competitive series, right? But it was clear that they weren't probably quite good enough to take the next step. But your hope and thought process was just run it back, and then kind of do whatever, right? Because initially, right, they made the Dillingham draft pick. as I guess a future franchise point guard, right, to pair with the other guys on the squad, right? And then they made the Karl Anthony Towns trade where they bring in Randall, they bring in DiVincenzo, and it just hasn't worked out for them, right? And I think we were always higher. We didn't really love it for either team initially, right? But we liked it more for the Knicks because Towns is the best player, no matter how you feel about him, right? And he's shown that this season, right? For the Wolves, Randall hasn't been bad necessarily. It's just it hasn't been enough to fix the problems. Obviously, recently he's been hurt. So that was kind of the problem for the Wolves, where when they were fully healthy, they weren't winning a ton of games anyways. They were struggling. Now they've had a bunch of injuries where Randall's been out, DiVincenzo's been out, right? They made changes to their starting five where DiVincenzo was moved in for Conley, right? Conley was moved to a backup role. Dillingham, in the stretches he's played, there's been games where he's been good. There's been games where you can tell he's still a work in progress. But when the roster's healthy, he's not really seemingly in the rotation at all. McDaniel started off the season pretty bad. He's been better as of late, but you still kind of just wonder, like, offensively, how many guys can you really put out there? Recently, they've had a very different group, right? Where it's like Naz Reid with Gobert, right? Naz Reid is more of a stretch big, better shooter than Julius Randle, right? Conley's back in the starting five. He's looked better. I mean, again, maybe once they get their guys back, they'll look better. At least Edwards, right? He's continued to progress, especially as a 3-point shooter. So that's a great sign for them because that's their franchise player. But it just feels like there hasn't been a whole lot to write home about for this team. They did get that ownership situation figured out, so it seems like, the new ownership is going to come in, so that's good for them. But it's just been tough where, this was one of the best teams in the league last year. Now they just kind of feel like just another team kind of in the middle of the pack. Maybe when they get their guys back, with the way Edwards has been playing, they can pick it up. But it still feels like that they're not quite good enough to do as much as they were able to do last season. And you're just left feeling like, why couldn't they have waited until next summer? I know it was a cost-cutting financial move, but it just seems like they've really been beaten and bruised on this deal.
Yeah, I agree. I had them as a C, and I had another team as a C as well, and that was the Kings. But I'll start with the Minnesota Timberwolves. Yeah, I mean, right now, I kind of feel like there is a potential for them to, climb the standings a little bit. Because granted, the Clippers are playing 500 basketball, the Timberwolves are as well. But I think the key team to watch here is definitely the Houston Rockets because they are sliding. They really can't, really catch a break. They're 3-7 in their last 10. So I'm hoping, that Minnesota can climb those standings a little bit. But the problem is, they got to be able to play, above 500 basketball. And that's the problem. They've been
Right.
so inconsistent, no fault of Anthony Edwards, but it's really been, the other guys, some guys have been hurt here and there. I like some of the things that have happened, in the offseason. Like I like, the rookies that they drafted, but outside of that, definitely not a fan of, the cat trade or whatever. And I think, going into, the season before that trade occurred, I think, a lot of people were kind of high on this team because it's like, all right, yeah, we went to the Western Conference Finals. Let's run it back. Let's see what we can do. Hopefully there'll be some internal development. We got the young guys coming in, and then all of a sudden we got blindsided with the Towns trade. And I think that really just kind of killed the vibe off rip because we knew, and we could all see, if ball, we knew that team was going to take a step back. We didn't really think that they would probably go back to the Western Conference Finals, and lo and behold, I don't think they're in the position to do that at the moment. The only thing that could potentially restore my confidence would definitely be them being able to climb up to the 5th seed. How likely is that? Who knows? But I think they do have some easier games, coming up. So there is a possibility for that. But at the end of the day, I just don't think you needed to be in this position. And it was definitely avoidable if they had held on to Towns. But, it seems like with this whole CBA thing, people are scared of, committing long-term money to certain guys. And, I do understand that. But at the end of the day, I feel like it was a slight mistake because now you've taken a step back, but you're going to have to retool and refigure some things out in the offseason. But not necessarily a waste of Edwards's talent in a year for his development. But I think you are still hurting it a little bit because the guy is getting doubled like every freaking possession. And, I guess it's somewhat making him better, but I feel like he could be so much better if he had legit help.
Yeah, because he's been shooting the three ball great, but part of it is almost out of necessity because
Yes.
when they had the normal starting five, right, he just couldn't really get to the rim at all, right?
Yeah.
Now that you have Naz Reid in there, okay, but that going to be the lineup like the rest of the way once Randall and DiVincenzo come back. I'm not really super sure about that. So, who knows, maybe, but and that's the point. Like, what do you even do with Randall, right? Because he'll have that player option. I'm assuming he picks it up because there's not really teams with cap space, so there'd be no point in him opting out and leaving. But it's like, if you're the Wolves, do you want to continue to roll with that? Because it just feels like it's just you're better off using that elsewhere, as opposed to just kind of like, just running it back. Because I think if they run it back, like I don't think it's good enough to really get to wherever it is they want to go.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So
And
now,
I
yeah.
also had the Kings. I did
Mhm.
want to just say my little piece about the
Oh yeah.
Kings.
Go ahead.
Um, you know, really not much to say outside of, what you said, but, it was kind of jarring, I guess, to see, De'Aaron Fox go. But the return was kind of mid, like you said, Zach Levine. It kind of makes sense, monetarily, but at the same time, I feel like you're still taking a loss, taking on his contract because he's a solid player, just on a really, really horrible contract. But, I think the positives do somewhat outweigh the negatives. You did get Valanciunas, Jake LaRavia, and you got the pick, I believe it was like 2031. So that could be a future asset that they definitely will hold on to for a potential, rebuild down the line because it seems like they're headed in that direction for some odd reason. But, you still do have some talent on the roster. You do still have DeRozan, you do still have Sabonis, so it's not like you completely gutted your roster. You just traded away arguably your best player and got back a mediocre return. So that's why I'm in the C range. So
After that, then we're moving on into the B's. I got four B's, right? So I'll do the Blazers, the Spurs, the Warriors, and the Nuggets, right? So I think, I guess we can start, with the Blazers, right? Just kind of work our way up, right? With the Blazers, I mean, again, the main thing is that they're 24 and 33, which, again, doesn't really sound like it's that amazing, but, this was a team that going back, we had the under, and their under was 20 and a half. So they're already, with what, like 20 something games left in the season. So they've already reached their over. I
mm-hmm.
think recently, right, in terms of the last month or so, is where you've seen them play their best basketball, right? They're 6-4 in the last 10. There was a stretch where they won 10 out of 11, right? The big change for them has been on the defensive end, where they just have a lot of energy on that end, a lot of really good defensive players like Tamani Kamara. He's come in and he's really been a factor for them defensively. That was a guy that the Phoenix Suns drafted, by the way. But after that, right, you got Denny Avdia, right, from the Wizards, right? He's played very well for them on both ends of the floor. Obviously, they've had stretches where, they have three centers, right? But they haven't necessarily had a ton of games where they've all played together. But when you get the guys like Robert Williams and Donovan Clingan out there, you see them being really good on the defensive end, right? So there's a lot to like, from those spots. And then, from some of their younger guys, right? I already mentioned Kamara, although he's not quite as young. But like Scoot Henderson, right, in year two, right, we've seen some actual growth for him, right? Like he still doesn't start, but this season he's at 12-5, 43 from the field, 37 from three, right, and that's on the over the course of the season, right? When you look at his more recent play, right, it has been a lot better. Where he's had some big games for them, you can see him being more comfortable as a point guard, being able to read the floor and making the right plays. So he's gotten better, over the course of the season. So that's good to see. Even if it still feels like he's still not quite where I think we would have wanted him to be, given what I think most people felt about him going into the season. So, you look at all that, they do compete, right? So that's kind of the other nice part too, right? Where they've, they're not just kind of ceding losses away. They beat the Hornets by like 50 something points or whatever the other night, right? And they just look like they look like, if you catch them on the right night, they're actually a really fun team to watch, even though their record isn't necessarily that amazing, but it's still way better than I think what we would have thought, especially given the injuries, right? Because they've had a bunch of guys in and out of the lineup, right? Where like Shaden Sharp had a long stretch where he was out. Clingan had a long stretch where he was out. Aiton's not even playing right now because he's got the calf injury. So I think you got to feel better about them than you did probably earlier in the season. I still do kind of wonder, right? Like with all these wins, wherever their pick ends up in the draft, is it going to be maybe a little bit lower than they would like? But, I think that there is a lot to like about what they have going on there. It just would be nice if some of those vets they could move off of because they don't really need them. Like, you just don't really need Jeremy Grant. You probably can't move some of the other, like, you probably can't move Ayton. Who knows? But, it's just some, but either way, there's at least something there in terms of what we're seeing, where I think it's been a much more enjoyable experience. If you're, if you're a Blazers fan, right? I think, you got to feel better about what we've seen, right? And then the Spurs, that one is easy, where it's just, Wemby in year two, before obviously his season ended with the blood clots. He looked like, the real deal in terms of everything that we could have, hoped to see from him, where he looks like a game changer. He looks like an absolute superstar on his track to being one of the best players in the league over the next few years, right? Where gave him 24 and 11 with 4 assists, just under 4 blocks, 48 from the field, 35 from 3, right? Just, incredible on both ends of the floor, especially defensively, right? Kind of finding his way after a weird start to the beginning of the season, right? Stephon Castle, right? He's popped as a draft pick, right? He's given them a lot on both ends of the floor, mainly on the defensive end, but he's starting to figure out some things offensively too. Obviously, then you have the other factor of being able to get De'Aaron Fox, right? That was, their midseason trade that they were able to pull off, where they didn't really have to give up any of their key guys, right? It ended up just kind of being just guys that you don't really need anymore, right? Like Trey Jones, and Zach Collins, right? So that's kind of a cool thing to see. Obviously, with Wemby season ending early, they're gonna, they're gonna fall out of the play-in, but that's okay, right? Because hopefully, right? Because obviously we don't know for sure, but hopefully his blood clot situation, he'll be fine, and he'll be able to be, what we hope he can be going forward. And then they'll be armed with some lottery picks, right? Because they'll have their own, right? They may have the Hawks, depending on what happens with them at the end of the season. So they'll have pieces to kind of think about, either drafting some guys or, making another trade or whatever. But, I think I like what I've seen from them so far this season, even though there's a few pieces where I think you feel a little bit lower on them, like maybe Vassell you feel a little bit worse about. But just as a whole, I think they've exceeded what I think some people's expectations would have been. Just we won't be able to get to see it the rest of the way because of the Wemby situation. Then for the Warriors, right? This one is kind of, I think, self-explanatory too, where obviously for them, they pretty much kind of did what they said that they needed to do at the beginning of the season, where they needed to win enough games to be able to hang around, and in the hopes that a trade comes their way, and if they get it, then they'll be able to make a run. And that's exactly what they were able to do, because Jimmy Butler basically saved their season, where they bring him in and he's, the exact type of second option that the Warriors needed, where he's able to kind of be in there. We talked about it earlier in the episode, where on both ends of the floor, he can be a major impact. It makes the game easier for all of the other role players who were just asked to do a little bit too much beyond their pay grade. Now they have like a real rotation, real depth that you can feel good about. And now they've gone from being probably a disaster where they don't make the playoffs to a team that probably will make the playoffs. And if they get in, they could cause some trouble and be, a possibly dangerous team. I don't think we're going to pick them to win the title, but at the very least, you feel better about, could they possibly win a playoff series? And, it's kind of funny because the second thing outside of Butler that saved their season was the 12-3 start that we knew was a fluke. Because if they don't start the season off that way, right, they don't have a good enough record to be able to kind of
Mm-hmm.
probably make a run. Or if they do, they would have to win almost every game, right? If they even lose a couple of games from that 12-3 start, say they're like 10-5, right, that completely changes, what would have happened, because then they're, right at or probably a little below 500, and they're kind of right on the outside looking in. But now they're kind of right in the middle of the pack, where if they can kind of just go, somewhere around 600 the rest of the way, they can probably, get into that 7-8 spot, maybe even sneak into that 6 spot if, kind of the teams above them start losing games. So, again, I think the concern with Steph earlier in the season was valid. He wasn't playing as well. He wasn't terrible, right? But you could kind of see a little bit of slippage there, and I think there is some slippage. But I think recently with the Butler trade, we've seen, 10 straight games of him giving them 20 or more. He's looked significantly better, and that's the best thing you could ask for, because now you got a better version of Steph, and getting into the playoffs, it'll make them more dangerous because they're only going to go as far as those main guys can get them. If you can have a scenario where Steph can be the best player on the floor in a series, you could possibly pull off the upset, and they wouldn't have been able to do that with the previous iteration of the team. So now they're poised to, for this season, probably the next season or two or so, right, they'll be in a way better spot than they were had they basically just stood pat, which we didn't think they were going to do, but it felt like they could have. And then for my last B grade team, it's the Denver Nuggets, right? So for them, I think, it was funny because going into the season, We felt a little bit worried, a little bit concerned about them for obvious reasons. They lost Caldwell Pope. Obviously, they had lost Bruce Brown the year before. You were wondering how they're going to make up for it. And they've made up for some of it, right, with Christian Brown coming in. And you've gotten some good minutes from Peyton Watson. It's just where you can't give them an A necessarily is the defense just hasn't been quite, I think, what you would have liked to see from them. There's too many games against some of the best teams where they just look like, they just don't really have it. Jokic has had basically a career season, so that's great to see. The offense has been clicking right there, the second best offense in the league, right? But, then you look at their defense, they're 17th. The depth is still a problem, and it still feels like they may be one guy short. Now, maybe they get into the playoffs. Jokic goes crazy. Murray's been playing great, so I think that's the other part because we were concerned about that given how he looked in the playoffs, given how he looked earlier this season. So your two main stars, there's not really any concerns there, right? You're just continuing to worry about the depth. The Sarge piece hasn't worked out. Westbrook's worked out. He's played great for them, so that's good to see. You're just still kind of concerned about what do some of those things look like come playoff time, but it looks like they're going to be positioned for worst case scenario, a home court advantage team, right? Because, obviously, they have one less loss than the Lakers, but they do have an easier-ish schedule, I think, the rest of the way. So it kind of comes down to, can they maybe outpace the Grizzlies, right? For that spot. But, I think for the Nuggets, you feel better about them than you did at the beginning of the season. But I still think that there is some pieces here or there where I still don't feel confident about their ability to win the chip, which is what they were able to do a couple seasons ago. It feels like I said, they're still missing another key piece, especially defensively.
Yeah. So our B tier list was definitely a little bit different. For starters, I had Utah in the B plus. I know people would be like, what the heck is this guy talking about? But I'm looking at it from the Wizards type of lens where, your number one job is to be in that bottom four slot, for the highest percentage of getting the number one pick. We all know who they want. They want Mr. Cooper Flag. But also I think another key factor is the development of their young guys. If you watch, a little bit of Utah games, like you said, Isaiah Collier, I think, has proven himself to be a pretty solid, rookie and a definitely starting quality rookie because I think people kind of looked at him more so as a project, considering the fact that he did fall in the draft.
Right.
They also have Keontae George, who's also, another young project as well. Cody Williams, who hasn't really played a lot, but at the end of the day, he's still a young piece that you do, have. And then Walker Kessler. So, the development is there for sure. I think, you do like some of the young pieces there. So that's kind of why I do have, them at a B plus, which I know might not be valid to some people, but I think for, their objective and what their goal is, like I said, it's to be as bad as possible.
At the very least, they're bad. So
exactly. Yeah, be as bad as possible while also not hurting the development of your young guys. So that's how I feel about that. Portland, pretty much the same reasons as you. Avdia is pretty solid, and I think, all Wizards fans knew how, that was going to turn out and how he was going to look in Portland. You got yourself a solid, very well-rounded player. Like you said, Kamara being, an elite defender and also hitting the three ball, because I think that was kind of a question that people did have, can he hit the three ball? We all knew that he had the frame to be an elite defender, but the three ball has been falling down. What else about Portland? I think, Scoot Henderson has played, pretty well. I think, you see the flashes of, superstar potential from him. Shaden Sharp as well. I feel like that's pretty cool. But I think the one thing that is bogging this team down, because I think it would have been an A if they had done something special and probably unthinkable at the deadline and gotten rid of some of those stinky contracts. But, they're one of those teams that would probably be more looking to, take on those kinds of contracts. But, at the end of the day, they are still stuck with, DeAndre Ayton, Jeremy Grant, stuff like that. So, it would have been an A if they were able to get rid of those guys. But at the end of the day, you do like what you've seen from them. The Warriors, kind of the same thing. Can't really give them an A because I do want to see the final product. Obviously, this is post All-Star break. So, at the end of the season, I'm hoping that I can bump it up to an A because it seems like they're on that trajectory because the Butler trade is aging, beautifully. But he's been amazing, getting to the line, like you mentioned in the short. And we all know how desperate, the Warriors were. And that was kind of my skepticism about it. I just didn't know if they had pulled the gun too early. I didn't know what Jimmy was going to look like. Was he not washed, but was he really, going to give it his all if he got shipped out? Regardless, he stepped up to the plate and taken advantage of a great opportunity that's been handed to him, and to be able to play alongside Steph and take some pressure off of him is amazing. So that's an automatic B. I also had the Clippers in this range as well. I think this one is. I think this one kind of makes sense because I can't really give them an A. They're playing 500 basketball at the moment, but a lot of people didn't expect them to be here, so that's kind of why I do have them in that upper range, of the B area. The record is 31-25, not a horrible team by any means. Did majority of the work without Kawhi Leonard, so that deserves a pat on the back as well. But him being back, I think helps them for sure, and I think they do have some solid stuff going on in terms of the defense, and they do have some players that I think make solid impacts on a nightly basis. But at the end of the day, I don't think they go very far. But still, it's not like a lost season, moving on after Paul George and stuff like that. So that's obviously a W. I also had Houston. I know this is long-winded, but I had Houston in this as well. They've been sliding as of late, but the defense has been really, really good. I know that's been sliding as well, but for the majority of the season, I've really liked what they've established. I think they have a core identity of what they truly want to be. They are just missing that one guy who can really take over a game at any moment, and that's the reason why they've been slipping for sure. And I mean, they're aggressive. They play a very, I guess, like exciting style of basketball. Like, they have some great players like Amin Thompson, Jabari Smith Jr. The young guys are really solid. Jalen Green as well, Şengün. So I think the foundation is there. They just need to continue to build on it, get more consistent as well. But I feel like, there are some things that need some tweaking as well. And especially in the Western Conference, I don't know how sustainable that roster is going to be, but the positives definitely do outweigh the negatives, hence why they're at a B. And I also had the Spurs. I think the Spurs, similar to your reasons as well, De'Aaron Fox grabbing him, that really could have been an A, but I think, Wemby being shut down for sure does, hurt their grade. Granted, out of their control, but at the end of the day, they still needed to improve a lot because I think, the pairing of De'Aaron Fox and Wembanyama, it wasn't, flawless, I would say. There was still definitely some room for improvement around the roster and around those guys. So I am looking forward to an offseason, but at the end of the day, it's still a B- for me. B.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a fair point for all of that. Now moving on into the A's, right? So I have 5 teams in my A's list. So I had the Clippers in there, like you said, for some similar reasons. Just kind of the additional, like you said, they weren't supposed to be here. I think we definitely had the under on them.
Yes, we
and
did.
They pretty much, they're gonna go past that, that under, right? Because I believe their over under was 37.5, right? So
Mm-hmm.
obviously they still, they got a little ways to go, right, to get there, but they're pretty close. So I think
Yeah.
they're gonna get past
Yeah,
that,
they're
right?
going to
Like
hit it.
and like you said, they've had a lot of pretty good years out of a number of players, right? Like Harden has not shot the ball well, but he was an all-star.
Mm-hmm.
And he was able to kind of run their offense. Norman Powell, best basketball of his career. Zubac, best basketball of his career, right? This is without Kawhi being Kawhi for most of the season because he hadn't played most of the season. And he's had some games where he's been really good, but he hasn't played in back-to-backs, right? So you're still kind of reintegrating him back into the lineup. Obviously, they let Paul George go. We all thought that was not a great decision, but it paid off for them. They replaced him with some of the other guys. Their defense has been great. They made a couple moves at the deadline where they got Bogdanovich and they got Ben Simmons in the buyout market. So we'll see where they go. Like you said, don't expect them to really go far, but at the very least, they're not as hamstrung as they would have been had they just completely ran it back. This was probably the right thing to do. Now they'll kind of probably be able to ease out of this situation a lot better, right? Like, I mean, they could re-sign Harden and bring him back, but I'm just saying, like, they'll have more flexibility
Yeah.
than they would have before, right? If they had just kind of gone and back with the 3 main guys, right? So that's kind of the part where I think you just feel better about them, at least for this season. which is good, right? And then after that, I had the Lakers in the A range too, right? I think we were a group that actually I think was a little bit higher on them as a regular season team. We had the over on them. We felt like if LeBron and AD were healthy, they
Hmm.
could get possibly close to 50 games. I think one of the variables was, what does JJ Redick look like as a head coach? We didn't really know
Yeah,
because we
yeah.
had no framework for what it was going to look like, especially given the fiasco before where it looked like they were going to get the UConn guy, right? But it ended up, that ended up not happening. But JJ Redick's been pretty good for them, right? Where you look at what he's able to do, just in terms of the buy-in, right? And then especially given the fact that the roster's changed, multiple times over the course of the season, right? Like, initially, right, they had D'Lo and Austin in the starting five, right? Then they make the move where they move D'Lo, they get Dorian Finney-Smith. Now they bring in Luka, right? So that's a completely different puzzle that you have to kind of solve. So there's a lot of positives here, and especially the Luka trade coming out of nowhere, right? Where all of a sudden now their future is significantly better off, right? Because there was always kind of a back and forth as to should the Lakers go all in, knowing that LeBron and AD probably don't have too many more seasons left to play together, or do they just kind of run out the clock and just kind of just fade away? They didn't do either. They just kind of retooled, right? Where they moved AD for Luka, right? One of the best players in the league. And now, LeBron, maybe, say he comes back, plays a couple more seasons, right? You have a foundational guy to build around in Luka, where before would have just been AD, who I think is really good, but a tougher player to build around and not quite as good as maybe some of the other top, tier players in the league. But, now you're in a better spot. It would have been would have been even better if they had been able to grab a center at the deadline. They almost did, but they didn't feel good about his physicals, right? Which is understandable given how he's just not played very many games so far in his career. But they're better set now for the offseason because now they know what they'll need to do. We'll see what it looks like. They could be dangerous, right? So they could possibly be a team that wins a playoff series or two. Probably not the title, but you feel better about them than you probably did at the beginning of the season, just given the fact that the coach looks pretty solid. The roster looks pretty solid. They're going to have some flexibility in the offseason too with some, movable contracts. They still have their picks, connect, right? What maybe they keep him, maybe they don't. But, there's a lot to like there. So I think, again, still better than I think any of us would have thought, is even without the Luka piece involved, right? Because
Yeah.
they were winning games before the Luka trade, right? Like, so they were looking ahead of schedule. So that's good there. Then you look at and then like with LeBron, he's still gonna be an All NBA guy at 40, right? Where earlier in the season didn't look as great during that early stretch of December. He's off for a week since then. He's been playing great, even on defense, right? Where you can see him making the reads, making the rotations, making the extra effort. So it's just a really good story and a setup for them, and we'll see where it goes come playoff time. Rockets, I have them as an A. Similar reasons for you. This was a team where we did have an over on, but I don't think we quite expected them to look as good as they had looked. Obviously, they've been not so good as of late. They had some rough injuries. Van Vliet got hurt. Jabari Smith Jr. got hurt. Tari Eason was kind of in and out with, injury management. So, so that's kind of rough. We'll see what they look like once the full strength guys come back. Reed Shepard's been kind of disappointing. He just hasn't played a whole lot, and in the opportunities he's gotten, he just hasn't really looked that good. So that's kind of the pick where maybe everybody was just kind of wrong on that because everybody seemed like he was just kind of a surefire pick. But so far that hasn't been the case. But it hasn't necessarily hurt them because they've still gotten a great year out of Amin Thompson right in year 2 where he's looked fantastic. Jalen Green and Şengün, right? Şengün was an all-star. Jalen Green started the season off rough, but it feels like he's been better as of late, so you feel good about that. So, a lot to like, especially on the defensive end, and even in crunch time, they've won more games than they lost. They've been in a lot of them, but they're 20-16. It's just a matter of come playoff time, do we expect them to win a series? And that's where I think that's the part where it's going to be hard to pick them to win a playoff series. But even if they don't, I think you still overachieved this season. It's just a matter of, from here on out, what do they do, right? Because they're going to have some flexibility with the Jalen Green contract if they do move him. I'm not saying they will, but they do have some flexibility there. They have those picks, so they could go out in the summer and get somebody if they don't feel good about some of these players. Because with the way Amin Thompson has played, that might change some of the things in terms of what they can do, and that's why they didn't really want to make any trades this season because they wanted to see what they had with the younger players. And I'm not completely against that. It's just, it feels like, hey, maybe if they had done something, maybe they could have won a playoff series, but, this was probably ultimately the right decision for them.
Mhm.
And then the Grizzlies and the Thunder, they both get A's, right? With the Grizzlies, we didn't really know what to make of them going into the season, but I think we felt like they would be significantly better. We thought they'd probably be close to a 50-win team or more because we felt like they had just a nightmarish season last year where everybody was hurt. Job played like 10 games, right? He had the initial suspension early, then he comes back, looks pretty good, then gets hurt. And, everything just kind of fell apart from there. Even some of their young guys that showed promise, like G.G. Jackson, right? He got more opportunities. Then he gets hurt, in the summer and things like that. But you look at the Grizzlies, right? I mean, again, they've had a really good season this year where, they're kind of checking all the boxes in terms of what you'd like to see, right? They're sixth in offense, they're eighth in defense. So it's not quite as good as it was earlier in the season, right? But I think Jaren Jackson Jr. has been great. Desmond Bain, since he's come back from his injury, he's looked pretty good. They got a lot of young guys playing a lot of minutes that have looked pretty, that have looked awesome. Jalen Wells has been great as a rookie. Santi Aldama's taken another step forward. Zach Edey as a rookie has been solid. Brandon Clarkson's coming back from the torn Achilles. He's been great. They have a ton of depth. The main question right now is Ja at times, right? Because he's had a season that I think has been a little bit underwhelming at times. And you just kind of hope that, if he can figure it out. And they don't, and again, like for the regular season, because of all the depth, he doesn't have to do quite as much as he had to before. But come playoff time, he's going to have to look like the guy that we saw, before this season. Because if he doesn't, right, then they're going to kind of probably look like one of those fraudulent teams where they go out earlier than I think we're anticipating. But they look really good. And I think that's the part where you feel better about them now, where now they're back into the mix of the Western Conference, right? Because before that, they were a Western Conference contender, but they took a step back last year. And then for OKC, obvious right A, right? Because they're 45-10, best record in the Western Conference. Right there with the best record in the NBA, right behind Cleveland. And there's a lot to love, right? SGA's been like an MVP level guy. Could be the favorite for MVP. We'll see where it goes. Hartenstein has come in. He's really helped out the team a ton on both ends of the floor, right? Gives them a big guy that can rebound, who can also pass and play make and defend. So that's great. Jalen Williams was an all-star, so that's awesome. And all of this was without Chet Holmgren for most of the season, right? He played in the first 9 or so games, and they won almost all of them. Then he gets hurt. He's out for a long, long time, but they still found ways to win, right? So you got, your two offseason acquisitions, Caruso and Hartenstein, playing pretty well, even though they've missed some time. So that's the big part, is they've been able to win all these games even without being fully healthy, because we've only seen a handful of games with their full starting 5, right? Because even at the beginning of the season, Hartenstein wasn't available. So we've seen less than 10 games with the full starting 5. And it's looked, pretty solid, right? Obviously, there's still some rust to work off for Chet Holmgren because he missed so much time. But if he can kind of get back to what he was doing earlier in the season, right, where he, looked like he took another step forward, they're going to be really dangerous. And I think for them, really, it comes down to come playoff time, are we going to get, this version of the young guys or not? Because I don't think we're too worried about SGA. I think he showed that he can be a guy that you can go to in the playoffs and not feel like he's, like a lesser version of himself. It really comes down to the other guys, where can they kind of do what they need to do? Jalen Williams, can he be a legit number 2 offensive creator? Because if not, then that's where their ceiling's going to be lower, and it is going to be tougher for them to get out of the Western Conference, right? Especially given what some of the teams were able to do at the deadline in the lower seeds. But if those guys can deliver, I think they're going to make it out of the West and get to the finals. I don't know if they can win it against the Celtics. They played them very well this season, but if that happens, they're going to get out of the West, I believe. But we don't necessarily know if that's going to happen come playoff time, because it is a young team, and there are reasons to be concerned about that, and they didn't make any moves at the deadline. So I think that's kind of what you're hoping to see, that they're going to be healthy and they're going to be scary, and their defense, we know, right, is awesome, right? They're a defense first team right now. Their offense has kind of taken a step back from last year because they haven't shot the ball as well, but I think come playoff time, you're going to have SGA with the ball in his hands, and he's going to be able to work his magic. It's just like I said, it comes down to everyone else. If they show up, they get out of the West, and if they don't, they go out early.
Yeah, 100%. I only had four teams in the A section, so starting off, I had Denver, I had Oklahoma City, I had the Lakers, and I had Memphis. I'm gonna circle back to Denver. I feel like everything that they did has pretty much gone in the right direction. I think they're the true number two seed. I think they will overtake the Memphis Grizzlies and end up being the two seed by, the end of the season. And, we picked the over for a reason for this squad. Granted, will they get there? Who knows? But, obviously we know that Jokic is, the best player in the NBA at this point. Michael Malone, great coach as well. And yeah, Russell Westbrook, the signing, that's worked out amazingly. I know it started off really, really rough, but
that was one I'll take the L on.
It got so much better as time went on, and it's the perfect compliment. Jamal Murray, he came around finally as well. And yeah, like I said, every move that they've done, I think has worked in their favor, and that's a good thing. There still are some questions. But that offense is just so explosive. And I think, obviously having Jokic is automatically puts you in that conversation of being a contender, I think, every year. And I think, yeah, they're really the true two seed. I would pick them over, Memphis if they end up going head to head or something like that. And speaking of Memphis, they're also an A team that I had as well. Kind of similar to what you were talking about, we they had a crazy freaking season last year, and it was just filled with all kinds of mess, but the crazy recovery and what a way to bounce back and stuff like that. So the turnaround was amazing. And similar logic to the Oklahoma City thing, Ja Morant missed 20 plus games. So that just is a testament to how good and deep this team really is. They've kind of find hidden gems, and there's some guys that haven't even played yet. So, overall, I think offensively and defensively, they're amazing. They're top 7 in both categories. So, yeah, for sure. We knew that they would kind of return to form. It was just a matter of, how good would they be, and they are really freaking good. We have the Lakers as well, similar reasons to what you said. The Luka Doncic trade automatically gives you an A because I think, you secured yourself for the future and you get, the rest of the season to kind of see, what you're going to get. Obviously, we know what they're going to get, but, what is it going to look like, with a pairing of LeBron James, because we haven't really seen Luka, be paired with a player that's similar to him in that regard. So, that's obviously interesting. And then obviously the internal development of certain guys, moving on from D'Angelo Russell and giving AR more opportunities on the offensive end has worked out amazingly. You're getting a lot from a couple other guys, like you talked about, I think a few weeks ago, Gabe Vincent, actually showing up and not being, pretty much a freaking cardio guy. Vando coming back, that's a plus. So similar to, some other teams that we mentioned in the A category, everything seems to be going their way as of late. LeBron seems to have, kicked it into a second gear as well. I don't know if that's because of the whole AD trade or whatever. Maybe he feels a little, maybe a little younger, but he's been balling as well. So yeah, overall, I think, and JJ Redick actually turning out to be a solid coach, I think that helps as well. So everything has really gone their way as well. And I think, the Thunder, that was the last team. Obviously, pretty much same reasons that you had mentioned. They're so good on both ends of the floor. Did it all pretty much without Chet. Chet's coming back, or he's back. They're trying to ease him back to full health or whatever. So, defensively, they're amazing. And we already know that they're kind of in that tier of Boston. So that automatically pretty much is A plus, the highest grade that you can possibly give. SGA going off pretty much every night. And yeah, he could win MVP. And yeah, there are questions. Every team does have questions. But I think they will be answered this year. So that's what I'm going to leave it at.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the point where, like you said, I think for OKC, just kind of comes down to those young guys, can they show up? Because again, if they do, they're going to make the finals, I think. And I think they were our pick to make the finals, not to win, but we think they're going to make the finals. So I think we're all in on, what these guys are able to do. It's just a matter of will it happen? And, that's where a little bit more worried, I guess, than I was maybe, a few weeks ago about whether or not it happens. But, I guess just kind of continuing on OKC, Do you think that they could lose in the first round to any of these teams if those teams are fully
Mm,
healthy?
I
Like,
don't.
say, like say if it's, Minnesota or, Dallas fully healthy or Golden State, probably not Sacramento or Phoenix, but like in general, like, do you think that they could lose to any of those teams?
I mean, I feel like I would fear, a couple guys, a couple teams,
Okay.
in a 7 game series. No team is invincible.
Right.
But like I feel like the Golden State Warriors are one to watch because if Steph, we already know what Steph can do in the playoffs. So if he turns it up a notch, there could be a time when it's like, game 6, game 7, he just puts them away. Now, do I think that's like super duper likely? Probably not, because I think Oklahoma City is so good on both ends of the floor. There's almost no excuse for that to happen but Steph popping off. I feel like Minnesota could happen, not as likely as the Warriors, I think, because, I just feel like Minnesota's a little too inconsistent at the moment. Especially going up against Oklahoma City. I feel like OKC might match up a little bit better in terms of that. But I mean, I feel like honestly, and I said this, I think, the last time we talked about Oklahoma City and, what they could potentially do. I think they can't, I think they'll beat every team in a 7 game series in the Western Conference. Simple as that. I really do think that they will come out of the West. But if we're talking about, a potential upset, I think those 2 teams would probably be, the most prime to do so in the first round.
Yeah, I think that's gonna primarily come down to like, is there a world where somebody other than SGA could be the best player in that series, right? And if the answer is yes, then that's where it could be more vulnerable. I think for the Warriors one, there could be a scenario where maybe SGA is the best, but then the second and third is Steph and Jimmy, and then that just kind of
Sure.
cancels it out where they're maybe able to, like you said, pull it out if it gets to like a game 6 or 7.
Sure.
Um, the Timberwolves one is just kind of funky because I think it also kind of comes down to like what is, offensively, can they find ways to kind of muck things up for, Oklahoma City, because, in the games that they've played, right, they had the first matchup, right, where Oklahoma City beat them.
Mm-hmm.
Then in the second matchup, Minnesota basically destroyed them, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that was, with this version of the Wolves where they're missing some guys. And
Yep.
that's where I kind of, so like if it's the regular version where it's like Julius Randle, right? And then, whatever it's Conley or DiVincenzo out there, you do kind of wonder, right? Because we know a couple of those guys, like Randall doesn't have the best reputation as a postseason player, but because it's such a strange team relative to Oklahoma City, maybe, right? And then the Dallas one, it's just there's one game of a proof of concept. So we need a bigger sample size of what that team looks like at full strength. Where, could Anthony Davis be the best player in a series against a team like, in Oklahoma City? Oh, maybe, right? But but that's where you kind of wonder. And then like with Memphis, they could be vulnerable too, right? Where like say, that's where you need Ja to be at his best, right? Because if Ja is a little bit underwhelming and Jaren Jackson Jr. ends up being probably the best player in the series, they're going to be a lot more likely to lose, right? Like if they play the Warriors and like I said, Steph outplays Ja, and then Jimmy is kind of like on par or close to Jaren Jackson Jr., they're going to go out, right?
Yeah.
But
Yep.
if not, if we get the version of Ja that we saw in previous seasons, that's where I think we're going to feel significantly better about them. But it also with him, it's the injury bug, because that's the other problem where it gets tough for Memphis is even though they've won a ton of games, you need Ja to be healthy if you want to be able to make a real run. If he can't stay healthy for 6 weeks in the playoffs, then that's where it might not happen.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think, the race for the playoffs is here. And
Yeah.
people are excited, they're hyped, and I think the good discourse is, these predictions like,
Mhm.
who's going to go up against who's the most volatile, or is
Right.
Oklahoma City fraudulent? I don't think so. I think they're good. A lot of
I agree.
people a lot of people are coming for, J-Dub's neck, Chet's neck. So, I am hoping that those guys do show up and prove a lot of those
Right.
people wrong, but I have belief in them because I think they pose, or they have all the skills, to be the second and
Yeah.
third best options on a title winning team. That's the reason why, they are where they are. So
Yeah. Just you kind of wonder because like say last year people questioned the Celtics even with the fact that they weren't a super young inexperienced team, right? They were a team that had guys that had been to the playoffs a ton, right? And people questioned them despite most of the numbers telling you this is a championship level team. and then they just kind of roll through the playoffs. Will we see that from OKC? I don't know if we'll see that, but I think, like you said, I don't think they're a fraudulent team. I expect them to shore up and do some work in the playoffs where I think they can, legitimately get, make a, get out of the West. I mean,
Yeah,
they should. I mean, with the way that they're as far ahead as they are in the West, I think it would be a major disappointment if they don't at least get to the conference finals, because they got to
yeah,
the second round last season. So if they can
yeah.
get to the conference finals, right? That'd be a successful season for me, because I didn't pick them to win the title anyway,
Me
so
neither.
I wouldn't be disappointed if they didn't win it. But I think it would be pretty disappointing if they went any worse than conference finals. That would
Yeah.
be really bad. And I
If
think,
if they go
I
out in the
mean,
first round, it's GG's. I don't want to hear anything about that team for a long time.
yeah. Now we're gonna get into, a couple news and rumors, right? There were a couple of things that came out. So according to Shams, sounds like the Sixers and Joel Embiid are consulting doctors. They're trying to get some alternative options on his injured knee. We know, unfortunately, for the Sixers, right, it just has not worked this season. He's hinted multiple times, right, that he's probably going to have to get some work done on his knee after the season's done. So we know it's just not been great for, that team, and they don't really have any other options. And, you kind of wonder now, like, are we probably just not going to see him the rest of the way? Because I think if you're the Sixers, at this point, you might as well just kind of just call it a wrap, mainly just from the perspective of you're not really going to be able to do anything. You're going to overtax guys. And if you're kind of bad, but not the worst, you lose your pick, right? Because it's top six protected. If it's outside of the top six, it goes to Oklahoma City, right? Which means that Oklahoma City would have a top 10 draft pick going into one of the best drafts that we've had in a little bit. So so that would be pretty rough if you're the Sixers. So, if there's any doubt, that he can, that he would hurt himself, if he continues to play, just shut it down, because I don't see a real pathway for them to really be able to salvage the season. And it's just not worth it, because you gave him a ton of money and you don't want him to be in an even worse situation than he already is, where it's probably not going to get better. So I think you're better off just, shutting it down, running the clock out on this season, and then just kind of hope that maybe you can do something in the summer, because I think this season's a wash.
Yeah, I agree. Shut them down. And I feel like it should have probably been done a long time ago, if I'm keeping it real. Just everything has gone wrong. Paul
Right.
George, that's been a blow up.
They lost the Claxton at the buzzer.
Yeah, and I think that was on PG if I'm not mistaken. So it's like, geez, bro, like you can't make this stuff up. But at the end of the day, it is an unfortunate situation because we know how good Embiid can really be if he is, and when he is healthy. But we just got very, very little, attendance from him this year, and couple that with Paul George and how bad he's played and the injuries that he's had. Yeah, it's just not a good look for that organization. So just shut it down, keep your pick, and hope and pray that everybody gets better, including Jared McCain. So because I think there are a lot of positives on the team. Like we've already
Hmm.
talked about Philly a ton this season. Like Tyrese
Hmm.
Maxey, you love him. Paul George, I guess you don't love him anymore. Embiid, you love what he can do when healthy. Jared McCain looked like he was going to be an awesome star. So I don't know. We'll have to see in the next season. But yeah, shut it down.
Yeah, the Spurs also got some put out some additional information on Greg Popovich. It seems like he's not going to return the season, unfortunately, right? It
Yeah.
seems like he's still recovering from that stroke that he had in November. So they did say that he's getting stronger and stronger in his rehab, but it's just, what a rough scenario for the Spurs, right? Where you have your franchise cornerstone guy, right? He's going to be out the rest of the season with a very serious uh, thing where it's not, quote unquote, an injury, but it's blood clots, where we've seen, it could be okay, but it could go the other way too. We're hoping it's going to be all positives. And then obviously for Popovich, it's a mild stroke, but he is 76, right? So he is an older guy. Obviously, these things affect people in different ways, right? But just, again, it just stinks because, again, like you feel really good about the future of the Spurs, but right now they got hit with some really tough news for from both of those, right? Because I mean that's their franchise coach, right, who's been there forever, right, and then obviously their franchise guy who they're hoping to build around, who's going to take this team to the next level. So just pretty much like a just a tough few days for the Spurs, unfortunately. Just
Yeah,
stinks.
like you said, yeah, it really stinks. Super unlucky, super unfortunate. I would say the future is bright at the end of the day, and continued prayers for both of those,
Hmm.
ailments that they are going through, because like you said, they are serious. No matter how you really look at it, because Popovich is up in age, and Wemby is young, but blood clots are no joke. We already went through the process of what you have to do, to potentially get rid of those. So
Hmm. Yeah. And then after that, the Grizzlies GM squashes Ja rumors as Zach Kleiman calls possibility of Morant being traded this summer nonsense, according to the Daily Memphian. Right. So this, came after that report or the thing from Howard Beck on that podcast talking about, some one exec thought that maybe Ja could be possibly the next star. Where if things go south, right, maybe Memphis trades him. Of course, just because the GM says it's nonsense doesn't mean it is nonsense, right? But good on him for at least squashing it right now, right? And it's a miss, kind of a rough stretch for Ja, right? Where they got blown out by the Pacers. He had a really bad game. They did get a bounce back win against the Magic, where he really struggled again, and then he was able to close it out for them in a big way. So hopefully, this is kind of a sign for him to continue to lock in and continue to play better going forward. Because again, whatever their ceiling is, they're gonna need him, right? As we just talked about.
yeah, I mean, it is a weird situation at the end of the day. I think nothing would surprise me at all at this point. Post Luca trade, I feel like any superstar is tradable, but at the end of the day, Memphis did accomplish a lot this season with Ja missing 20 plus games. So there is somewhat of a valid, I guess, logic behind it, but still, Ja is a super valuable player, and definitely one of those guys that you probably want to keep on your team and within your organization, considering that we know what he can do, and let's hope that he elevates in the playoffs and shuts all these rumors down for good.
Yeah. Grizzlies released Johnny Davis, so we don't have to talk too much about that. And then exec unsure on older roster model. The days of quick fix additions may be over, right? So, according to Tim Bontemps, he talked to an executive for the East where he said there's something to be said for having a roster with established chemistry and continuity rather than trying to force it with quick fix additions, which is interesting, right? Because you would feel like with the new CBA, it seems like being able to keep a roster together might just be really tough. But you could also make the case that with the new CBA, maybe some trades might be more difficult, even though we had more trades than any season in quite some time. So, but I understand the thought process of you may not just be able to just kind of just bring a guy in and kind of just, fix everything. It may just be a scenario where you kind of have to build your team. Where we talked about ideally, you want to put your team together before the season starts. You want to do that work in the off season so that way guys can get used to playing together. You know what your team is going into the season. Then you have the season to kind of see, all right, here's what we need. Here's how we're going to get better, as opposed to kind of hoping and praying that there's something at the deadline that can turn your season around. There were a few teams that were able to benefit from this, but we still think that the teams most likely to win the title are the teams that were already built and put together before the season began, right? Like the Celtics, or in your case, right, the New York Knicks, or some other teams, that some other people have picked, right? So that's where I could kind of see, both sides of the argument, right? Where, like if you're the Suns, right, like they were hoping to maybe swing Bradley Beal elsewhere to bring in somebody who could help fix it, but then they couldn't, right? Because, he had the no trade clause. Now, obviously, that's, kind of an outlier case, but that's the argument for why, again, you got to be able to kind of, that's also why you want to do the right things, right? And not kind of just, just add random guys to the roster. Not that he's a random player, but just, for a scenario like that, if it doesn't work, you're kind of stuck, right? And for the Suns, that move did not work, and they didn't really have an ability to really do much else. I mean, they got Nick Richards, whoopee, and then they got rid of Nurkic, whoopee, but I mean, it's not really enough.
Yeah, I mean, that point makes total sense. Look at the top three teams in each conference. All those teams were, put together, in the off season, and they had a full, camp, all that stuff. And they're at the top for a reason. You know what I mean? So that makes a lot of sense. And with the chemistry thing over time, like even Boston, like look at how long Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown have been paired together.
Hmm.
So it was kind of only a matter of time before those two got a chip, and I don't know, maybe look at Cleveland, next, maybe not this year, but I'm just saying, down the line, could we be seeing like a Garland Mobley, I don't know, whoever else is on the team at by the time they do potentially get to the finals or something like that. But I mean, it makes sense, and yeah, like quick fixes probably won't work. And that was kind of my skepticism on the whole Jimmy Butler thing from the first place, but it's been working out pretty well. So it is kind of like you can definitely say, well, teams that do stuff at the deadline can definitely go to the finals. Like Dallas, when they, brought in their new additions, they went to the finals and they looked so much better and stuff like that. Like with the Lakers, the year that they had that amazing deadline, they went to Western Conference Finals when people didn't really think that that was possible pre-deadline. So, I feel like there's an argument for both.
Yeah, but I think your best bet at winning the title is you got to do the work.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Starts. At least with the teams that did the midseason trades, now for next season they'll be better positioned to do some more stuff if they choose to do so. Even though we probably don't think they're going to be able to win the title this season. Like, will they have a chance? Sure, but will they win it? That's where I'm not really That's where I'm not really on board too much with that.
Yeah.
Then last but not least, Luka Doncic tribute video being planned by the Mavs for the Lakers game on April 9th, right? Didn't expect it to happen this early, right? But, we are at this point now. So just obviously we know what's happened with the Mavs situation. It's been, kind of weird, kind of bizarre, right? Where it just feels like, lots of random shots kind of being thrown out for no reason. But, again, as bizarrely as they've handled it, I'm curious to see what it looks like. But it just feels like this should not have happened if you're the Mavs, but we don't have to keep going on about that.
Yeah, it makes no sense to me. Talking about a Luka tribute video in 2025 was not, on the bingo card, I don't think. But I am circling that game for, Tuesday, February. I think
April 9th.
Yeah, I know that, but I'm talking about the 25th one where Dallas is visiting LA. I think everybody's, has that one circled for sure.
Right.
So
yeah, unfortunately, it's going to be ruined without the Mavs guys playing, because like AD's not going to be playing.
But I still want Luka to drop 71.
Exactly. Yeah, you'll be curious to see how Luka responds to that, right? And it's kind of a big game standings wise because the Mavs, they kind of need to start stealing some wins here and there if they want to be able to stay afloat. Because if they don't, then some of those teams below them are going to move ahead of them.
Yeah, I'm super curious how this is going to all pan out.
Yeah, all right. So I believe we have a comment to read. So, I guess you can.
Oh, yeah. Speaking of the Mavs, we did have a comment to read from our longtime supporter, Xander Cade, and he said Luka is washed. This was on, a short that we did, I think, a couple of weeks ago or a week ago or something like that. And I mean, at the time, Luka was definitely not playing up to standard. Definitely not playing his best ball at all, since joining the Lakers. But you got to keep in mind, he didn't really have his, the ground wasn't really beneath his feet yet, in my opinion. I feel like, he had just gotten to LA, new situation, probably still dealing with the fact that he, the franchise guy, was traded from, a place where he thought he would retire, complete blindside, yada, yada, yada. We all know the story. But acclimating to a new situation is definitely, something that, I don't think a lot of people can, say that they always handled amazingly. So, but, in his, what was it, the most recent game that he played, he dropped a 30-point game and a big W. So, shout out to Luka for, figuring it out, it seems like. But, I don't think he's washed. But at the time, I definitely do understand, why someone would potentially say that, because he was playing pretty awful.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why we said give it some time. It's too early. Because and him playing well is going to make all those other pieces fall into place, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like we said for the Butler thing, as these star guys get acclimated, right? Then that's when we'll kind of see the better versions of these teams.
Yeah.
Well, that's pretty much it for today's episode of Off Ball Takes. Again, let us know your thoughts on, the games that we had seen over the course of the weekend. Let us know your thoughts on the teams in the West with these midseason grades and your thoughts on who do you actually think has a real shot at getting out of the West, right? Again, we, appreciate the comments whenever we get them, right? So if you send them, we'll read them at the end of the video. We also appreciate it if you continue to like and subscribe to our videos as well. Help grow the channel, right? Help everything out. And we'll see you in the next episode.